GameStop's
Dun
dying
dun
for those of you who haven't
I'm
been paying
surprised they've held
attention.
on as long as they have.
So this week this week alone they laid off about 100 plus staff, like 100 and change. In that 100 some people that they laid off this week, that included about 50% of Game Informer staff.
That
So
magazine nobody wants. They get
Yeah.
tricked into subscribing to.
I
Yep.
had a subscription to it for a while, I'll admit, but I mean, it still sucks. Like, people will be losing their jobs, and it's not cool. But so this week, GameStop is essentially laid off 14% of their staff this week. Overall, for the course of the entire month, they've laid off about 15% of their overall staff. Like, the overall staff of GameStop as a whole. That should tell you something. Like, 15%, and it's only 100, and I think it was, the total for this month is probably about like 150, 160. And if that means they don't have very many staff left already.
I wonder how much of that is related to locations just closing up shop, or are we talking about people just getting cut from stores that are remaining open?
Well, I believe it was last month it was reported that GameStop was cutting regional management, like cutting people from regional management. So that's also a thing that they've been doing too, is firing their managers. So like they're
I mean, I would think GameStop corporate would just be force choking all the managers, man. Doing bad job, I guess. The thing is, I think that company's just so foregone. The company has such a bad reputation. They would like have to change the name of the company, and somehow put a new spin.
I
on
mean,
their
they could
business.
rebrand themselves to EB Games again. Because EB Games still exists in Canada. Because believe it or not, EB Games, just like Circuit City, they're both Canadian companies, and they both still exist in Canada, as far as I know. But when EB Games was leaving the U.S. market, GameStop bought them all up. So that's why, like, I think it was like 15 years ago now, all the EB Games started turning into GameStops, So maybe they can't rebrand because EB Games is still a thing that exists, but I don't know. Maybe they would need to rebrand or something, because they're essentially the EA of brick and mortar retail, gaming retail at this point,
That's a great comparison.
Yeah, it's bad. GameStop is just going down the hole, hardcore, and it kind of sucks considering there's still a bit of a kind of a thrill, I guess. Not really the word I'm going for, but to go into one of these gaming stores and just look around and see what you can find, Like, you're not necessarily looking for something, but you go into one of these stores and you find, oh, hey, this old game that I didn't even know existed or completely forgot existed. And hey,
I don't think you're gonna find like a Nintendo World Championship,
No.
cartridge, and I'm just the that kind of garage sale flea market thrill that you would get from going to a store. That is like the opposite of what you would get going to a GameStop. That is like the opposite of a mom and pop store.
Well, I'm not saying I'm not technically talking about GameStop in general. I'm talking about game
I think he
stores
just
in
means
general.
like the physical like browsing and like the experience. I think it's probably a bit
Yeah.
of nostalgia
Going
for...
into a game store and just looking through
You
what
know,
they have.
I think about how much people got screwed by going to GameStop,
You're
and it
not
was like,
wrong. Yeah.
why did people stop going to mom and pop game stores? Was it because of these GameStop pre-order exclusives or something?
Probably.
Is that
That,
what
and I think a
happened?
lot of them just started closing down. So there's like less and less of them.
Because usually the mom and pop stores, you pay higher prices at. Like the larger the store chain, bigger the store is, the usually the better the prices are. But it seems like, I don't know, GameStop has a reputation of, ripping on people. So it's kind of
Yeah.
it just really makes me wonder, like, really makes me wonder. Just in that particular industry, I would probably would prefer going to the mom and pop place than GameStop, but if I was going to choose, which,
I mean,
well,
they're hard to find nowadays. A non-chain game store, you know. Anyway, let's move on. More Sony news, and I to be honest, I didn't want to talk about this. Like I first saw the patent article earlier on in the week for the how the PS5 patent that got filed, and I was like, no way, Sony would never do something like this. And then it got a bit realer when a developer at Codemasters came forward saying, we've got PS5 dev kits in, and yeah, they kind of look fairly similar to the patent filing that got leaked. And since then, we've also had 3D renders of the patent drawings and the patent filing show up, and god damn, it's ugly. Like, I'm sorry, but what the fuck are you thinking, Sony?
it looks like a Mega Man energy tank or something. Like just something Mega Man would pick up.
It just
Power
looks
up.
so bad. It's really fat, and it looks like the whole top half of the console is dedicated to cooling because it's got the big V cutout in it, where you can see the whole ventilation coming through from the top half. So it looks fat, and it's got physical media buttons on the front, like we're back in the early 2000s, late 90s, again with VCRs and early DVD players. And
it's the Sanyo PlayStation. The
it's
Sanyo PlayStation.
it's just,
That's what it is.
It looks old, but like old and then trying to be futuristic.
it just looks bad. It reminds me of the silver boomerang controller that they tried to get away with launching with the PS3, and it's just like
If you think this PS5 dev kit looks gaudy, I mean, I look at like a lot of like RGB like gamer PCs and gamer accessories, and it's like, that's where a lot of this shit kind of comes from. Just all these, I don't know. I don't like all the colors, all the vents. Tell you something, that ventilation slot that we're talking about, the V, it almost looks like something for stacking. Like if the bottom of it has some sort of protrusion, imagine like being able to just stack those one on top of the other. That could be like some sort of convenience for having them like in a store, maybe
I doubt
out of boxes.
it's going to have anything on the bottom like that, but it's just like Sony's being silly with their designs again. Let's hope that they don't go through with it, because last time they tried something like this, again, silver boomerang from PS3, from when they first announced the PS3. And then it got such a backlash that like kind of like delayed the PS3 just to fix the controller because it got such backlash, so much backlash.
Imagine that this whole thing is just a troll because they're not talking about any of their new stuff, so they release some outlandish shit and they just get us to talk about stuff for them, but it's all inaccurate.
I just hope that it's wrong. I hope that Sony is doing a red herring thing. Like that was kind of like my whole hope when I first saw the patent and everything. And I was like, well, it's ugly. Sony wouldn't do something like this. But then I remembered the boomerang controller. But at the same time, though, like they've been modeling their recent generation consoles after the PS2, ever since the PS2 became such a big hit. Ever since we got the big black monolith, you know, the PS2. Then we got the PS3 modeled after the PS2, but with a bit of a domed curviness to the top. And then we went back to like the brickish design with the PS3. I mean the PS4. And then let's talk about how big this thing looks, because this thing looks pretty bulky. Yeah, like this thing kind of looks like the OG Xbox in size. You know, I mean, this thing's pretty big looking, and Sony seems to be going backwards in this regard. Because let's talk about this generation, shall we? Like the PS4 and the OG Xbox. Like I'm looking at them right now. The PS4 is smaller than the OG Xbox. Then we have the slim variations, the Xbox One S and the PS4 Slim. Those are a bit smaller than their respective consoles. And then for some reason, Xbox releases the Xbox One X. It's smaller than the Xbox One S. So it's I think it was about 25% smaller than the OG Xbox, which is significant. And then you have the PS4 Pro, which goes backwards and is actually bigger than the OG PS4. And it's just confusing. Like, Xbox was able to pull off native 4K in a smaller package by using like vapor chamber cooling and stuff like that instead of relying purely on fan horsepower. Meanwhile, the PS4 Pro doesn't run at native 4K, and it kind of like does a fake 4K thing. But it runs at like a what's the in between of 4K? The 2K standard is 1440p.
1440p.
Yeah, I think it runs at 1440p at 30 frames per second. Meanwhile, the Xbox One X runs 60 frames per second 4K. No, I think it runs at 30 frames per second 4K. But yeah, and it's bigger than the original system. But why? And then this happens. We see this ugly thing, and it looks huge and bulky and just completely like it doesn't seem like something Sony would do. Like I'm gonna harp on this a little bit, just because it's like I'm confused as to what they're doing here and what they're thinking. Like, if it was just a patent filing, it'd be fine. Like it's whatever. It's a throwaway thing. It's something that they're thinking about or they thought about, and they just wanted to get the patent out there, just so that somebody else couldn't copy it or whatever. It's a common thing. Game companies do it all the time. Like there's Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo own patents that they're probably never going to use. But then like the whole thing about the developer coming out who works at a studio that's reputable, Codemasters. They do a fair amount of stuff for a fair amount of platforms and stuff, and he was talking about how Codemasters recently got the PS5 dev kits, and they look similar to the filings. Now, it might be possible that this is just for the dev kits, which I'm kind of hoping it is. But
Yeah.
there's the possibility that it might not be, and it might be what we get, which myself and multiple other people are really, really hoping that it's not. What's your opinions on this? I've talked enough about this. I don't want to talk about this anymore.
I just have to say, usually, if the new console is more powerful than its predecessor, it's okay for it to be larger. Okay, and then eventually there's a revision of it, and then it shrinks. They make it a little smaller. They change the process a little bit, but it's the same power as the one that came out a couple of years before that. That's where you get the slims. So as far as the PS 5 being big console, I mean I got like ATX towers. I got like 3 ATX towers around the home. It's not that big a deal for me. That's a PC case form factor, if you weren't privy to that.
Motherboard form factor, but yeah.
Yeah. PlayStation 5. What I'm kind of hyped for with the PlayStation 5 is just its backwards compatibility. And I almost feel like, I don't need to get a PS4. I can get a PS5 at some point, and by then there's going to be this huge library of PS4 games and PS5 games that are going to be compatible on this thing. And if the first iteration of PS5 is like a gaudy gaming PC, if that's what they're going to go for, I don't think they're all going to be like that, but that's just could be what the first one looks like.
Yeah.
Part of us we're really thinking this is some kind of fake out. It's a dev kit. Doesn't matter.
That's what we're hoping for anyway.
Well, I almost want to think about what if prior dev kits looked like. I don't really have much reference.
As far as I'm aware, most dev kits come in basically a PC case.
Yeah.
Like before the console gets released, pre-release dev kits usually come in like they look like a PC.
That's primarily why it's not really something that gets brought up, because a normal kind of PC case is, like I just said, normal. There's nothing really distinctive about a normal ATX PC case.
Yeah.
Something like the first PC case I ever got was called an Antec 300. That was like one of the most just plain kind of black looking cases you could imagine, really. But it was good.
But yeah, that's generally what they look like. So that's why it's a bit weird to see this happening.
It's almost like they're putting so much effort into this freaky looking dev kit. Maybe some of that styling will that carry over to the final thing? And
maybe they're doing this whole thing just to get reactions from people, just to see if people like the look or not.
They're doing it for clicks.
It very well could be. Yeah, anything.
It could just be like them testing the waters, seeing how people react to how this looks. Like, would people be like? Is there any interest in a console that looks like this? Because you got to keep in mind, like, this is a box that's going to be sitting next to or under or generally around your entertainment system for years to come. Like, how many people are going to want something that looks like this sitting
it's
next
just
to their
so
TV?
big. So many people have many different consoles, so you're thinking like efficiency and size. Like, I don't want like a big, bulky, heavy box.
Not anymore, anyways. I mean, that's like they've slimmed down so much nowadays. It's just like,
yeah,